response that physiologically the fetus will express the same response because they're connected.
Oh, okay.
It's just very basically connected because when a mother has a physiological response, it's really information being sent through the blood that is communicating this response to the entire body.
Right.
Well,
her experience produces certain biochemicals in her bloodstream, and it also goes into the baby's, right?
So the baby is being another human body with the same cells in it, at the same organs and all that, then whatever a signal was affecting a mother's organ or experience, that signal would have the same consequence on the developing fetus.
Just a quick aside before you get back to your point. You were telling me recently about also brains from the cells from the baby that goes to the mother brain, so that that mother's tuned that baby in a very interesting way. Just mention that too.
Yeah. Well, is that what makes each one of us different? Is, remember I talked about the cell being like a computer chip with a keyboard on it.
Yeah.
Well, on each of our cells is a different set of keys, like a PIN number. Now, each of us has our own unique PIN number, which is really a set of antennas on the surface of the cell, receptors. And the significance about it is the receptors receive information and send information. They're vibrating. All atoms and molecules absorb and emit energy, okay? So the receptors on your cells, your PIN number receptors, and the receptors on my cell, different set of numbers, like combination locks. So each of us is on a different broadcast frequency. And then it's interesting because during fetal development, a number of the fetal cells from the developing embryo
with that PIN number of that baby.
Migrate into the mother's vascular system. And as it has now been found, it was interesting how it was first found was that there were studies on women that had liver problems and they were undergoing liver regeneration, so they were taking some biopsies out of the regenerating liver. And in a number of women, they found that the cells had Y chromosomes. In a woman, there's XX chromosomes. In a male, it's XY. So it said, well, in this woman, or this number of these women, the biopsy showed that they had male cells in their liver. And when they tracked it back, it was each one of them had a male child. And that's how, and so then they started recognizing, oh goodness, that the cell, because when I used to teach histology, and we'd have sections of the placenta where the uterus was, you would see these cells in the mother's blood vessels. And in our description back then, the stuff I was teaching back then, was that when the baby was born, these cells would be eliminated by the mother. Now it turns out they're not eliminated by the mother. They actually are reserved in her, and they serve as stem cells. So that's how they found, for example, the first ones, that these fetal cells came in and help replace the mother's liver. And they found that these cells are in other parts of the body, and there was a report that a number of these cells end up populating areas of the brain. Well, the relevance about that is if the mother's brain contains cells that have the identity of her child, then she will experience what that child has experienced if she's sensitive enough.
And this is how we children have that feeling that mothers have eyes in the back of their head.
Absolutely.
And you can't get away with anything.
No,
They know.
you could be a mile away and you're already in trouble.
Exactly. How did she know that, Mom? Now we know. Now we know how she knew.
But this is a very important developmental consequence because it really allows a continuity and connection of people. And the community and the mother and all the offspring in this regard.
And talk about intimacy, huh?
Well, it certainly, I guess, had a high survival factor. If there was something wrong with the child, the mother could sense it right away. And in fact, a lot of women do. Obviously, something is wrong with their child. Even they don't see the child, they can feel it, sense it, almost instantaneously.
Well, what's interesting too is that that we've created those little devices that you keep with a sleeping baby that radio any kind of disturbance to the mom, so that's just an outward technological apparatus that is an imitation of the same inner apparatus that nature developed.
Absolutely, and if we would really go back to more, getting back into what we really came endowed with, our sense systems, our awareness systems, consider like the Aborigines, for example, who are using this system. Because they're so ingrained to feel the environment, sense the environment, be so connected to it. They can tell where water is without seeing the water and all these kinds of things like that is because they're using receptor systems that you and I have and everybody else in the audience has right now as well.
We just turned those off for the time being.
We never exercise their use, and therefore they sit there or atrophy and go away at some point.
I don't know if they're atrophying it, so they're just radioing all this info, and we just ignore it.
We're not listening.
Yeah, I think it's
noisy.
the sad part. Yeah, exactly. We're so distracted by other things.
Well, I think that's one of the basic differences in these other worlds. They're really so tuned into these sensitivities. They know what's going on in their environment by just tuning in their heads.
Or that stuff is radioing to us, but we're just not understanding the language it's speaking.
That's true as well. That's why childhood development of these things is important, to allow a child to develop and experience and feel when they can, it felt like this or it felt like that, and distinguish between the sensitive feelings that they get. And that's like creating the language out of it.
Yep. But back to how babies are perceiving with those brain waves. You were saying also that babies, until they're at some age, don't really operate in beta and alpha. They're mostly in the delta brain.
Yeah, well, this is where I realized as of late, all of a sudden all the pieces started to fall together on the meaning of what, we're talking about, all the perceptions in life and how to experience a better life and a better control and stuff like that. This is where it all came down to a focus, and it made all this sense, and all of a sudden I myself just stood back and went, oh my God, it was that straightforward, and it was just
Apparently
like a shock.
beautifully designed, yeah.
And so basically, the idea of the system is to learn perceptions, because the perceptions are the responses to the environment that keep the organism alive. Okay, and so perceptions are very important to be interpreted correctly, because if you have a misperception, and that means that somewhere between the stimulus coming in and the behavior going out, there was a disconnect, so that the behavior and the stimulus are not coordinated. A misperception could lead to, obviously, disease, illness, death in this regard. You misperceive a foe from a friend, that you could be dead that way real quickly. So perceptions are really the element that are guiding us through the environment. So interestingly enough, the perceptions are created by the experiences of the individual and how they sense the environment and see what goes on. So a prenatal child and a neonatal child are downloading experiences. And the interesting part is, in the process where they're downloading these experiences into tapes, programs, behaviors, this is the period from prenatal to about 5 years of age. And why this is the most important period is during those periods that the child is only operating in delta and theta, which means not consciousness. It's a state of imagination and play and unconsciousness. And why this is then relevant is that then the perceptions that are created, which are most of our perceptions are in this first 5-year period, are actually created as a result of watching the parents experience the environment and observing how they handle the environment and create tapes. And the interesting part is, in delta and theta is the state of brain activity that is called the hypnagogic state. The hypnagogic state means if you want to hypnotize somebody, where you can download data about, anything, you say, like stop smoking or something like that. What you do is you put them into delta or theta and then feed them a program. And when it goes in as a straight program with no discrimination, meaning to observe the program coming in, that you would have to have consciousness to observe it and say, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, or what you feel about it. But the child, in the process of getting almost all of its programming, hasn't even reached consciousness. So that meant when we were kids, before age 5, we were like little walking tape recorders. Mm-hmm. We recorded everything, and we did it without consciously observing what we were doing. It was just a natural process.
And without any filter.
No discrimination. There was no consciousness. It was just download. And now this makes one exciting jump, and that is the perceptions that we learn are actually twofold. There's one set of perceptions that are outwardly directed, meaning me as an individual, how do I behave in the environment when this happens or that? I watch my parents and I emulate them, I follow what they do. And then, so if I then experience the same stimulus, I will do what they did because they're the teachers, okay? Well, so one aspect of my perception is how I work in the outside world. The other part of my perception is who I am inwardly. What that means is, while you're growing up, your parents are giving you an identity of who you are. And they could say, okay, well, you're not good enough. and as soon as they start to say a tape like that, you make a tape, you acquire a perception of yourself as, number one, not good enough. Number two, you may, because of the environment, eat more for protection. And therefore you acquire a tape that says, I must have this amount of weight to protect myself in the environment. Now, these are tapes. Why is it important? There was no discrimination on the part of the individual who was making the tape that they were making it even. So we acquired perceptions of how we behave outwardly, and we acquire perceptions of who we are inwardly.
That aren't necessarily true or necessary or good for you.
Yes, and most likely in most cases, they were not very positive for the human population as, as children, from parents who didn't know any better. So that's one of the big problems. And so now you take this fact back that these are tapes. They're put into the system. A stimulus shows up. The tape will play without varying at all because it's just a direct playback of the program, okay? Well, when this happens then we connect it to this other fact that we talked about before. Cells in community must always conform to the tape. They do not have a choice. If they break that, then the community breaks down. Cancer is an example when the cells say, well, hell with the community. I'm on it for my own all of a sudden. And that's the point where if that happens, when the cells break from community, it is cancer.
The other choice is to change the tapes, and Bruce, along with his good friend Rob Williams, are on the lecture circuit to... Bruce, you're on the lecture circuit with Rob Williams, and you're going to be talking about how to actually change those tapes. What's the website for further information on this?
Well, there's several websites. The two that I can give right now is one is mine, which is the Scientific Foundation, which is the biology of perception, and that would be www.brucelipton, just run on .com. BRUCELIPTON.
Okay.
.com, and that's my part. And Rob Williams, who's just a wonderful man, I guess he's going to be on next week, has developed a most extraordinary way of changing these tapes for us, helping us identify tapes that are requiring a change, and those tapes that came in when we weren't conscious. And part of of his process, actually getting to how you identify core beliefs that may be diverting you from where you really want to go, is on his website, where you can do a self-test of some core belief issues. And his website is psych-k.com, psych-k.com.
And so his work fits so beautifully into what you've been able to synthesize with all the latest science about the process of perception.
It's just so wonderful for me to work with Rob, because for a number of years, as you know, we've talked about all this new biology where we talk about how perception begins to really control things, and at the end frequently left with, well, gee, that's great and I understand, but what can I do to change these perceptions or identify them? And I was always left with, well, and so it's just been wonderful, because working with Rob, right after I end my section, all of a sudden Rob gets up and then shows people right in the audience how you can change a belief you've held your entire life that in a sense cripples you, change that belief in minutes, and that's it. And the first time I saw Rob do that just blew me away, because it was a conference in Colorado that we were both at, and I remember even the woman's name back, it was now I think 10 years ago, Pauline Augustine, and she was in the audience. I didn't know her then, and Rob was going through this whole belief change mechanism, and he asked if there was anybody out in the audience that would like to, experience this. And I saw how Rob was up by Pauline's hand, because it kept going up and then going down and up and down, and so he looked at her and said, tell us, or come on up or something. And she couldn't talk, and her issue was that she froze in public. She couldn't talk in public. And So he started to work out it is the receptors receive information and send information. They're vibrating. All atoms and molecules absorb and emit energy. Okay, so the receptors on your cells, your pin number receptors, and the receptors on my cell, different set of numbers like combination locks.
Mm-hmm.
So each of us is on a different broadcast frequency, and then it's interesting because during fetal development, a number of the fetal cells from the developing embryo
with that pin number of that baby.
With that pin number of that baby.
Yeah. Just a quick aside before you get back to your point. You were telling me recently about also brains from the cells from the baby that goes to the mother brain, so that that mother's tuned to that baby in a very interesting way. Just mention that too.
Yeah. Well, is that what makes each one of us different? Is remember I talked about the cell being like a computer chip with a keyboard on it.
Yeah.
Well, on each of our cells is a different set of keys, like a pin number. Now, each of us has our own unique pin number, which is really a set of antennas on the surface of the cell, receptors. And the significance of response that physiologically the fetus will express the same response because they're connected. It's just very basically connected because when a mother has a physiological response, it's really information being sent through the blood that is communicating this response to the entire body.
Right. Well, her experience produces certain biochemicals in her bloodstream, and it also goes into the baby's, right?
So the baby is being another human body with the same cells in it, at the same organs and all that, then whatever a signal was affecting a mother's organ or experience, that signal would have the same consequence on the developing fetus child. And that's how, and so then they started to recognize, oh goodness, that the cell, because when I used to teach histology, and we'd have sections of the placenta where the uterus was, you would see these cells in the mother's blood vessels. And in our description back then, the stuff I was teaching back then, was that when the baby was born, these cells would be eliminated by the mother. Now it turns out they're not eliminated by the mother. They actually are reserved in her, and they serve as stem cells. So, and that's how they found, for example, the first ones that migrate into the mother's vascular system. And as it has now been found, and it was interesting how it was first found, was that there were studies on women that had liver problems, and they were undergoing liver regeneration, so they were taking some biopsies out of the regenerating liver. And in a number of women, they found that the cells had Y chromosomes. In a woman, there's XX chromosomes. In a male, it's XY. So it said, well, in this woman, or this number of these women, the biopsy showed that they had male cells in their liver. And when they tracked it back, it was each one of them had a male child.